I feel like nervous.
Yes, it's okay. There's not many people here.
Yeah, that's true. There's literally no one here.
Yeah.
It's like they shot the first episode and then there's a documentary and then like, oh my gosh, we need to make this a show forming-wise. And I was like, yes, because it's like so much of a time lapse between episode 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But I was here all day, and then I loved that Whitney got them like little shirts that had their names on because I couldn't keep them straight. So I needed that.
Okay, well, we're about 2 minutes out. Any questions anybody has?
Expecting last request there.
Yeah.
Was the way you started it. But you were about to say that you changed yours quickly.
You're gonna start out with a.
Maybe give it 1 minute.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm putting my phone on do not disturb since I get messages.
It doesn't matter.
Just crazy.
All right. Before we get started, Washington State University would like to acknowledge that its locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. Currently, there are 37 federally recognized tribes that share their traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington State. Some of these nations and confederacies that represent multiple tribes and bands. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original current caretakers of the region. We acknowledge that the disposition of indigenous lands was often taken by coercive and violent acts and the disregard of treaties. For that, we extend our deepest apologies. We owe our deepest gratitude to the Native peoples of this region and maintain our commitment towards reconciliation.
I'd like to introduce Matthew Jeffries, who serves as an Assistant Dean of Students and Director for the Access Center. Additionally, he serves as a co-chair of the Community Equity Response Team, which advises the Chancellor and campus leaders by identifying early warning signs of divisive incidents on Wazoo Pullman campus, helping to coordinate quick and consistent responses to these and other bias incidences, and facilitating thoughtful action when an incident occurs.
Corinne Anderson is a third-year undergraduate studying forest ecology and management and geological studies. A native of Fort Worth, Texas, she is a proud member of the Samish Indian Nation from the Pataus lineage. She is the activism chair of the WSU Native Americans Women's Association.
Next, we have Shelby Sayrocki. She's an Assistant Attorney General assigned to the WSU Division of the Attorney General's Office. Shelby's portfolio includes public records, public safety, internal audit, student affairs, academic engagement, as well as the College of Business Communication and Carnes. Shelby joined the Wazoo Division of the Attorney General's Office in September of 22. After law school, Shelby worked as a deputy prosecutor in Nez Perce County, Idaho for 5 years, where she prosecuted misdemeanors from initial appearance to post-conviction and appeal, and represented the county at hundreds of evidentiary hearings, mediations, and trials. Before joining the Attorney General's office, Shelby was an assistant city attorney for the city of Lewiston, Idaho, specializing in land use, public records, open meetings, and code enforcement.
We also have Marco English. He is the WSU University's archivist and has now been helping researchers explore the university's history for more than 20 years. He's written on the university's early days and regularly shares the history of our campus, its mascots and its traditions in classes, papers, presentations, and the media. And he has a presentation he would like to share with us, if you're ready.
I just have to stay close. You're gonna be able to pick me up if I stand up here. I need to stay close to the microphone.
If you want the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here, we can give you this one.
Didn't plan that part of it And it's on? You can hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, they asked me to come in and talk a little bit about the history of protests at the university. We got a PowerPoint coming up there as well.
Juicy, you want this one?
So I brought in a little bit to talk about student activism here in the history of the university, and I've got about 6 minutes to do this on 130 years to cover. So that's about 3 seconds here. I'm going to talk very fast and say a lot of things here, so I apologize for that. There we go. Hey, we've had student activism here going on campus back to the very first year. 1892 is when we started teaching classes here. And this is the campus as it would look like in 1892. Our first dormitory being built there next to a cabbage field. Back at this point in time, what happened was our president was a man named George Lilly. The Board of Regents, the people who are responsible for hiring and retiring the president, decided to replace George Lilly. He was very popular with the student body. They put together a petition to ask the Board of Regents to keep the president that they liked. Of the 300 students on campus, all but 3 signed the petition. If you can manage 99% of you guys coming together to agree on anything. Unfortunately, the Board of Regents, in response to this early student activism, said, thank you, we're the adults in the room, we know what we're doing. We're gonna replace George Lilly with a man named John Heston. I tried to point at that one, I should be pointing at the computer here. And what the students did in response, about 2 weeks later, the head of the Board of Regents, a man named Andrew Smith, brought John Heston to campus to meet the students, to meet the faculty. With only 300 students, you get most of them together in one spot. While they're waiting for the president to come up, they're singing songs, effectively what we might think of as protest songs today. Popular songs of the day with the lyrics changed, including one to the effect of, we'll hang Regent Smith from the old apple tree and have George Lilly as our president again. Heston and Smith come up behind this and kind of go, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe we'll meet people individually on a smaller basis. And they start heading back toward town. Students up there see this. And what happens next is a matter of several reports. Snowballs, they're certainly pelted with snowballs as they fled down the hill. Certainly some of the rotten cabbages laying around. Dirt clods probably didn't actually happen, and the reports of eggs, well, that happened later in the day when they're chasing them around in the town. Big black eye for the university, and unfortunately didn't change anything, although actually John Heston, there was a congressional investigation, John Heston was removed as president, as were the Board of Regents. So maybe it did change some things there in a negative way. We're hiring a new president here in the next year or two. If you don't like him, this is not what I suggest doing. But we have had student activism since 1892. 1936 were big student protests on campus. This is a march here on campus. They were upset over social issues and not social justice as we think of it today, but the way that men and women could interact, when, where, how was heavily regulated. And the administrators were enforcing things, but the student body felt that it was random. They didn't have any real say or any real knowledge what the rules were. So they went on strike to demand to know what the rules were. They held a meeting over in Bowler Gym. All the student body got together. Should we go on strike? Should we not go on strike? They decided not to go on strike because they thought it would be rude. In which case the university president promptly ignored them, so they got together again the next day and then decided to go on strike. So 1936, we're having marches on campus, we're having protests, okay? This is outside Thompson Hall where the president's office would have been, looking down. We've got convent or college on one of these posters here. Hitler over Germany equals Holland or over WSC. And once they did go on strike, you see the evergreen the next day, all requests are granted. The students standing up and taking activism made a difference in the university and their lives at that time. After that, we continue having smaller protests throughout the years. World War II, we don't have that much going on in the 1950s. We moved in the 1960s, we start seeing very small protests on campus, as you can see from this peace protest in 1965. But by 1969, 1970, we're having the big protests we all think of today. This particular one is a march, 300 people marching from campus to downtown where the draft office is located to protest the draft. They're protesting several things over the course of it. Racial issues, this is Uncle Sam depicted as Native American, Chicano American, African American for a racism workshop there. We shut down campus for 2 days, no classes, brought in speakers, and all the students got together and talked about racial issues. They did that twice. That was fall 70. There was another one in spring 71. A very different local poster for that, a very different look in what they're saying in that. We're also upset about the war. This is when the draft went into place and students started realizing they could get drafted. We're also upset about how minority workers are being treated by the US government and by the corporations that employ them. We see a lot of different types of protests on campus. Student meetings, this is right out in front of the Cub here, people getting together, having speakers. I keep pointing up here when I should be pointing over there. This is Boulder Gymnasium at halftime of one of the basketball games in Boulder Gym. A large number of students came down, occupied the center of the basketball court, and raised their hands in the Black Power salute. They had, I love it, they called it guerrilla theater. They had theatrical skits out on the mall. That's the Cub at the right there, Terrell Library be behind it. The Bozo the Clan head on the middle of the raised middle finger is supposed to represent University President Glenn Terrell. Most of this was peaceful. Not all of it. This was a sit-in out on Stadium Way in front of the president's office in French Ave, where it was by then. Somebody got upset with that, tried to drive slowly through it, no speed to it, and got a 2x4 with nails in it, thrown through a window for their trouble. And there were bomb threats and arson all over this. This is the football stadium in April 1970 when it was burned to the ground by protesters. Sorry, I'm starting to lose this. In any case, the big protest on campus happened May 5th, 1970. May 4th was Kent State. If you don't know that, fundamentally in one sentence, it's National Guard peacekeepers brought in to oversee protesters in Ohio, opened fire on them, killing 4 of them. Set off a firestorm of protests around the country, including here, where students marched into French Ave and refused to give it back until President Terrell came out and agreed to a couple of demands, which he did shortly do. The problem was they came back 11 days later with another list of demands that President Terrell could not or would not meet. And we had a student strike on campus for about a month until school ended, at which point it was all resolved shortly before finals week. The point being, we still have protests going on today, wide variety of protests, some of them very quiet, some of them very loud. We have protests with people standing up for their rights, people sitting in for their rights, people standing up for various issues, people standing against various issues. We have conservative issue protests, liberal issue protests, and in this post-COVID era, we still see protests going on. This is a poster I just found for something that apparently happened last week, and online stuff as well. This is a petition from about a month ago for issues here on campus. So though we've had protests going on and people think that the 60s and 70s big protests, student activism is still going on today and still making a difference today. And that was my little prepared thing for you guys.
Let's go up there. I think we wanted to start off by asking to anyone on the panel, what does free speech mean at WSU and how is it defined within university policies?
Well, I guess I can start a little bit. I would encourage any of the students who haven't been there to take a look at the WSU Missions and Values website. It has, I think, about 9 values that are listed on the WSU website, including one of them is your freedom of speech. And so WSU actually defines that in the missions and values and talks about how the free speech of students is one of the pillars of education. And I can't quote it because I'm not looking at it, but I think it is a really powerful statement about what the institution believes is your right to free speech.
I think adding on to that, as a student here at WSU, free speech is very important. My organization actually does a protest for missing and murdered Indigenous women in Two-Spirit. And if we did not have the freedom of speech, we wouldn't be able to do protests like that. I've been a part of multiple protests here on campus, and I think that's a big part of not just being a student, but being an American citizen.
Yeah, I would just add that it's core to who we are, right? We're a public land grant institution. We're here to serve the state. And I grew up in a very small town where we did not have a lot of differing views and opinions and perspectives. And so I think it's so important in order to learn about who we are and who others are and how to make the world a better place by hearing from those perspectives and not silencing perspectives.
Our next question for the whole panel is, do you think that the current campus climate at WSU impacts students' willingness to express their beliefs and opinions?
Yeah, I think it depends on where they are, right? I think that's there are a lot of outspoken folks, students on campus. I've also seen campus change a lot since before the pandemic and after. There were a lot more protests, I would say, before the pandemic about all sorts of things, and that has definitely changed a bit. I think activism has changed a bit post-COVID. I think there are probably students that feel like they can't speak up because of whatever they believe in, because they're not sure if it will be well received or not, right? And I can understand that. I was 18 or 19 once, and being worried about, is this going to end up in on social media? Is this going to end up in all of these different places and impact my life in a way that I'm not anticipating?
I don't actually speak to very many students in my role here at WSU, so I can't speak to right now. But what I would say is that when I was a student in undergrad, I said a lot of stupid things in class, and it was really great because some of my beliefs were challenged, and it helped me question those and think about things differently. And so, although I think it can be nerve-wracking to do that, I really encourage anybody who is in those spaces to have those conversations, because it's just going to make you a better person.
Also, I think we have a question for Matthew or Mark, whichever one of you could answer this better. Do you think our campus is as civically active as others around the U.S.?
I was like, I don't know if I can answer that. I've been in WSU a really long time, and I'm out of touch with some things of other campuses.
I guess I'm the same way. I've also been here a longer time, I suspect, than you have. And we do tend to think of WSU as a cow college, and that's why I almost have to bring along those photos of those things so that people know we have always had student activism. Students have always stood up. Ours won't draw as much attention as, at the same time we're taking over French Ed, students at UW are marching out and blocking I-5 and marching down I-5, and that's going to catch bigger attention. But it doesn't mean that what we're doing here isn't just as important and our students aren't making a difference. One of those things I note as you look at, maybe this is a slightly earlier question there, is I see from 1968, when student activism started really getting big, there's a sea change in how the university responds to these issues and how they interact and address. And you see that the student activism on campus, it makes a difference in those couple of years and how the university interacts and addresses. So, yeah, in short, yeah, we are just as active. It's just a smaller form. Yeah, different form.
Thank you.
So our next question is, what are the most impactful ways you've seen students get involved?
I think most recently, a lot of petitions that students have done. One that you had mentioned was the rapists that we got off campus. That gained a lot of traction. And with Israel-Palestine conflict, I've seen a lot of protests about that as of late. But I think there's been kind of a political change with my generation and us protesting online. And I've seen a lot of that lately.
Okay, thank you for your responses. Mark, we actually wanted to go back to you and just ask if you can tell us more about the protests in 1969 through 71. And just more about how the university responded and if that enacted any change.
There's a story, I always hate to say, I like this story because it's dealing with racism, but the changes made of it come out. There is a big story that happened, I think it's May of 1968, which is one that sticks with me. And forgive me, because it's hard to do in like short bites. I mean, so it takes several minutes here. But in that time, to bring students out, to get students introduced when we couldn't just send them internet videos or online things, you'd have to bring people, you bring students in here in person and they'd visit campus for a couple of days. So we brought in a couple of busloads of students on one May day. And these students happen to be from the Rainier Valley area of Seattle, which if you know Rainier High School, it's a heavily African-American district, even more so back then. So most of these students were African-American. A couple of busloads of high school students. There was a dance scheduled for them that for innocuous reasons, as far as we can tell, fell through. So they're just wandering around campus. They at some point are confronted with a group of obviously racist students. The N-word is used. They want to know what they're doing on campus. They go on their way, but I imagine these high school students confronted by college students, how intimidating that must have been. Reportedly, they go past, not reportedly, we know they go past Rogers Norton Hall, and the report says they're pelted with debris. And the university, and what happens is their advisors put them all on the bus, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, they drive back to Seattle rather than stay here and explore WSU. The university promises a full and in-depth investigation. And 2 days later, you can find that in the Evergreen. The headline, I think, is "Making Mountains Out of Molehills." For lack of a better term, the university whitewashes it. My favorite, in a yucky way, phrase is something to the effect of, we find that the amount of debris falling from the windows of Rogers Norton Hall is no more than would be expected on a normal Friday or Saturday evening. Because that's what happens when you walk past storms, right? You get pelted with garbage. And that's all, I mean, it's just horrible. But by the time we hit 2 years later, after student protests, we see President Terrell sitting down and negotiating with the students with their demands. Even those 11 demands that I think I mentioned, or I hope that President Terrell couldn't meet, and we had a student strike. Some of those he was happy to, some of them literally couldn't. They wanted to stop African-American professors who wanted to leave for other jobs. They wanted them to stop them from doing that. The university president can't do that. If someone wants to leave, they're free to leave. You can throw lots of money at them, I suppose. But the point is, yeah, I mean, it just, in these 2 years, the way the university engages, the committees they put together, it becomes a serious thing because, and I think it's all because those students stood up and said, we need to do something. This is not acceptable behavior. This is 1969. We shouldn't have this type of language.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is for all the panelists. What are some of the most important protests at WSU historically? And has there been civic engagement at WSU that has changed state or federal policy that you know of?
I feel I should know the history stuff, but I can't speak to how much state or federal policy anything we've done here. Done anything.
It's a little specific.
I mean, it's certainly changed local policies over the years, but yeah.
Local.
Yeah, I would just add, so in 2017, I was brand new. I was the LGBTQ Center director before becoming the director of the Access Center. And I became director in like June of 17, and in August or September of 17, there was a protest. And I was like, oh, this is great. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the man. Like the students are protesting me too. It's a jarring moment in your life. And it was one of the most effective things because out of that came committee work. And I get that you're like, more committees and task forces and commissions to change things. But we didn't get here in a day. And we're not going to get change in a day either, right? Too much change too fast, then snaps back to like exactly what we were doing. So change, I think, in small bites, very much like if you give a mouse a cookie, you ask for a glass of milk. That's kind of how I operate. And we got so much done. There were 5 working groups. One was really focused on cultural competency training for faculty and staff. And while that's in a bit of a hiatus right now, we were training probably hundreds of people a semester and just having the conversations and making people who don't like feeling uncomfortable. We were doing a ton of work around gender inclusive bathrooms and just figuring out where they all were. As you can imagine, Pullman is a huge campus. And so sometimes it's hard to find things and it's easy, or it's not easy just to like pull up a roster of that. So we got a lot done. And so it was slow, but it was mostly sustained, so.
Because I don't like the fact that it hasn't changed. I like your cookie thing a little bit because though student activism here may change things on campus, that activism spreads. I mean, as the students do, if you make the university president aware of these issues, when he goes off and interacts with the governor, he's going to say, our students feel these things. They are the big issues on campus. We look at like the proportion of, I mean, how minorities were treated and correspondingly the few number of minorities we've had here. And though we still, I mean, look around campus today, it feels like a very white campus. When you look at the data that says, I think it was like less than 0.1% of the population were Native American. I think maybe less than 1/100th of the population were Native American in 1969. I mean, the changes we make then affect forward. So though it might not directly say these protests change national policy or state policy, they do magnify it out. You have to start a ripple with a small stone.
Thank you for your answers. The next question we have is, can someone explain what and where the free speech zones are on campus?
I think this is why I was invited to this. So there's 4 different forums that occur in the free speech law, and there's a few of those that are on the Washington State University campuses. My thoughts are very centralized in Pullman because that's where my office is located, but I'm pretty sure that all of the campuses in the system have what we would call designated public forums. And so what that is it's a spot on the campus that's been designated by WSU to be a free speech zone. So in Pullman, that would be the Terrell Mall. And those zones have time, place, manner laws associated with them, which we would call content neutral. So what that means is that we don't care what you're saying, we just care how you're saying it. So there might be some limitations, or you might have to provide warnings before you have those protests or have those free speech moments, but all of those are listed in the WSU Washington Administrative Codes. The other public forum is a limited public forum, and surprise, you guys are in one right now. A limited public forum is a spot in which the institution has designated some sort of speech to occur, but it has limited it to a specific topic. So for instance, right now we're talking about free speech. Another example I would give is the Foley Institute lecture series, and those are typically about public policy. So the institution invites somebody in on a specific topic, and that's what the topic is. And so there might be other people who end up speaking during that series. You guys are gonna have an opportunity to ask us questions. So that's kind of how a limited forum would work, is that other people get to talk, but it is focused on some sort of specific topic. And then I would say that you have the traditional public forums as well, which I wouldn't say are on campus, but they're just outside campus. And what I'd say, those are like your sidewalks. So when you are, usually in a big city and there's somebody who's like outside the courthouse or outside a stadium and they have their signs and they're yelling and things like that, that is a traditional public forum. We as a society have always kind of said that if you're on public property and you're not disturbing anybody, then you can say whatever you want. And those have very limited rules about them as well. I think really the only ones you might have is like a curfew law, like you can't be out there at 2 a.m. by where people live screaming at the top of your lungs. But that's just another example of, we don't care what you're saying, we just care how you're saying it.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you think that WSU facilitating open forums or debates like this one between student organizations can help promote free speech on campus? By this, I mean, do you think if we facilitate more club debates or something like that, it would help free speech on campus?
Yes. I feel like so much of our communication now is virtual or digital, right? Like, please don't call me, just Teams me, DM me, whatever, right? And so I think that these types of forums encourage folks to think critically, think quickly about that, and be able to engage with it and also hear other sides. It is so, TikTok is like my favorite thing, right? but it has me down to like a science, right? The algorithm doesn't let me out of what I think about, right? Which is mostly dogs and food, right? And so I think if there are spaces where we're actually like critically like challenging each other, I don't know, either you can like critically evaluate your own position and hopefully like either move through it or change your opinion a bit, or maybe say like, no, I've evaluated other things. This is how I'm staying. I think that's just really helpful in all facets of your life.
I think things like this also really encourage you to go out and get educated about things like this and policies and things that people are being active about. I think as of late, especially after COVID, like you said, protesting has really kind of gone at like a standstill. And if people are out more in public and not just online, seeing people talk about things like that, you're less likely to be ignorant and go out and educate yourself on topics.
This feels recent to me and you guys. Probably not so much. One of my favorite events that happened here on campus was in the Trump-Clinton election. Some of the pro-Republican students built a Trump wall, a big wall that said Trump, supposed to be modeled the wall Trump was going to build between us and Mexico. And of course, there were lots of counter protesters. And I think there was a huge fear that that was going to flare up here on campus because it could have been a lot of people really going out and fighting together, the other side. And it turned into a lot of conversations between people. It was the most crowded I've ever seen that mall out there. I don't know if anybody's mind was actually changed on anything, but it was just so lovely to see actual conversations happen between these sides as opposed to online name calling, which is so much of what we seem to get these days.
Kind of building off of what you guys are talking about, how has social media impacted student activism and free speech? Is WSU addressing the spread of misinformation without impacting individuals' free speech?
For social media question, the part of the question that had to do with social media, I think it's a double-edged sword. It can be a way to really facilitate a group to get together, but other times it can really fall flat. I am old enough to have lived through Coney 2012. That happened when I was in college. And so it seemed like online it was going to be this huge thing and a ton of people are going to show up, and literally nobody showed up. So that can happen sometimes, but more often than not, it is an opportunity for somebody to get their event into more eyes and to get more interest in it, and then ultimately to get more people involved.
Yeah, I think of it a couple ways, right? I think it's easy to get into a bubble where you're just reaffirmed of what you're thinking and believing. I think the second part is, though, that your generation is so much more educated about things than I ever was, right? Like I graduated high school in like 2006 and we had dial-up internet. So if you wanted to look up something on the internet, it took forever, right? And so you're very selective, and here you're just inundated with information all the time, which also is very tiresome. I can really hope some space for that. But the world is at your fingertips pretty much always. And like people have had discourse in ways that we would never have imagined 20 years ago. And so I think social media is really a great piece for the most part. I think the spread of information is hard because sometimes we all get sucked up into it. I'm like, I got to Google that first. Like, let me double check that I'm not a big liar or perpetuating something that's not true at all.
I think having social media especially allows us to, like, if there's something that you're passionate about and other people around you are passionate about it, it's going to spread like wildfire and more people will be active along with you. Like I mentioned previously, the Israeli-Palestine conflict, because of social media, we were able to educate ourselves about it and go on protest, and the amount of people that showed up at those protests because of social media, I think is a really beautiful thing.
Okay, our next question is, how can WSU improve awareness among students regarding their free speech rights and any limits that may exist?
I think for me, it's we've been trying to do a bunch of communications this fall to help students understand, or actually all of campus understand, our free speech maybe obligations and values, right? I think there's been a lot. Sometimes free speech can cause harm to communities, like point blank, like I can own that space. And so I think the more we talk about like what it is, how it operates, and the more speech is the right answer, I think, to what is deemed hate speech. So.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up the series that Matthew worked on earlier this month and last month that had to do with free speech. And I was invited to participate in that. And I attempted to teach the people who are listening about their opportunities for free speech and then also some of those limitations. And I guess since you've given me this opportunity to talk, I'm going to do it again, which is that a student's free speech, the limitations to it is that they can exercise those First Amendment rights without materially or substantially interfering with the requirements or the operation of the school. So what that means is that, this is how I would put it, is that you have your rights here, but they can't trample on somebody else's rights. So you can have a protest, it can be on the sidewalk, you can have your signs, you can't get into the middle of the street and make it so people can't get through and that traffic is disturbed. And when I say you can't do that, what I mean is that it's going to be against some sort of administrative code within the school, and it's probably going to be against some sort of code with the city or with a state law. So what I would say is that I recently came across a video about Stacey Abrams and some of the protests that she did when she was in college. So I think it was 1992, when she was a student, she participated in a flag burning in front of the Georgia State Capitol. And there's photos of it. And what's beautiful about that is that she got a permit. She got a permit and she brought like a little pie plate to catch the ashes. And she was able to still make her statement, but make it in a way that it wasn't overshadowed by getting arrested or something like that. And that was in 1992. And by 2003, the state of Georgia had changed their flag and took off because it used to be like half a Confederate flag, and now that portion is no longer there. So I just encourage you that when you have your free speech, just make sure that you're not getting in the way or imposing on somebody else's rights.
Thank you for your answers. Our next question is for Corinne. What specific strategies do you or the Native American Women's Association use to promote constructive dialogues about free speech and its controversies on campus?
We've done multiple programmings, especially targeted at Greek life. However, anybody is welcome to educate you on Indigenous issues and bring awareness to things like that. I think the university, whether intentionally or not, has kind of silenced the Indigenous community because of where our center is and nobody knows about it. But we try to make a really big effort, especially in tabling events and things like that, to bring awareness to our community.
Where's your center?
We are in the basement of Cleveland. The basement with no windows. Nobody knows where we are.
So what ways can WSU improve policies or practices to ensure marginalized voices are heard and protected?
WSU could definitely promote minority voices. I think that, again, I can't speak for other communities, but where mine is, it's made a big impact on nobody knows where we are, and we're silenced. I also think that WSU could bring more education to minority communities. I know that, like, as a new Coug student, there were a lot of programmings that we had to go to, and I think it would be really beneficial to add some things like that about minority communities.
Our next question is, can someone just talk about the resources available to students to report concerns about free speech violations?
Can you define like a free speech violation?
Like
like hate speech?
Yeah,
First,
yeah.
Yeah, I think if there are concerns, compliance and civil rights, CCR at wsu.edu. They're located in French administration, ccr.wsu.edu. I don't know any of the other ways. You can snail mail them, you can stop by, anything that you can do. They're super responsive. And sometimes it is like hate speech may be protected speech, and that's crappy. And we can still talk through options and other resources that might be helpful. Sorry.
Yeah, I was also going to say, yes, CCR would be one of the places that you could go if you have a concern about hate speech that might be pushing into an EP 15 policy violation. But another thing I'd say is that if you see somebody who is protesting, who's making it so you can't get to class or you can't get into a parking lot or something like that, you can call your friendly WSU PD. They probably already know about it, but that's one of your other options.
Our next question is, how does WSU Campus Police handle protests and demonstrations to ensure both safety and free speech rights?
I guess that kind of dovetails a little bit into what I was just saying. So one of the things that I advise is the WSU Police Department. And I know that one of the things that they oftentimes do is they try to meet ahead of time with any group that is attempting to do a protest, just so that they can have an opportunity to educate on where the boundaries are, and also to provide protection if that's something that the event coordinators think is necessary. And I have seen them do that in the past. In the last couple of years, we have had a few protests who have marched through the French administration building. And I've seen the police with them as escorts, just to make sure that if something got out of hand, that there's somebody there to help out with it. So I would really encourage any students who wanted to have an event, that the police department is a resource in a lot of ways for you. And it's an opportunity for you to find out additional resources that they can provide, and also just to get a little bit of expertise on the administrative code, so that you're not in the middle of a protest and going, oh no, did I do something wrong? Is somebody going to show up and yell at me or arrest me or something? So I would really encourage anybody to contact them. They're really nice. I also say I worked with them, and they like working with students, and they like helping with this stuff.
Thank you so much. I think one of our last questions is just going to be, it's a little bit of speculation for anyone that wants to answer, but do you think the student and faculty arrests from the Israeli-Palestine protests on college campuses nationwide are in violation of free speech, or do you think that's more of an example of what can happen when you don't follow free speech zone policies? Yeah.
There's been so many that I'm really not sure, because it's very fact specific. But one of the ones that comes to mind, and it's one that I did discuss in an earlier presentation, was that there was a student who actually went to an event that was being held at a professor's house. Like, the professor opened up their house to having like a new student dinner. And then that student proceeded to bring out a microphone or an air horn kind of one, and start yelling and protesting the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And that was an issue where it was clearly, when we talk about forums, that was clearly a non-public forum. That was somebody's home. And so they did call the police, and she was removed. So I guess what I'd say is that it runs the gamut across the nation, and there's very fact specific, and sometimes there's going to be ones where it's really clear that that's not a spot where free speech can occur, but there's also going to be some gray areas. So I guess that's a non-answer, but that's the best I got.
We're ready to start Q&A from the audience if anyone has any questions.
While the audience thinks about it, I will maybe get us started with one. Have you noticed anything like the Trump wall on campus this year? There's Trump as a candidate again. And if so, What has been done to deal with that? And if not, do you find that an encouraging, a discouraging, a worrisome, or otherwise event?
I don't think I've noticed anything like that since 8 years ago, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think students, bills are bills right now. Things are really expensive, and I think folks are really struggling. So they're, I think, working more than they've ever worked before. I think that they're taking care of family. There's a lot of other factors that I think are pulling young people away from some of the political activism that they could have done, 8 years ago. At least it's kind of my guess. And it's about, I want folks to engage. I want folks to also feel welcomed here. That's kind of my job. And so I think that there's some complexity to that answer.
I almost have to say, yeah, there has been, I live off campus in Texas State most days, so I might not have noticed, but I tend to think that type of stuff happening. I kind of wonder how much of that I attribute to a change that you guys all went through with COVID and how that changed your lives and your ability to go out in public and your desire to go out in public. This is almost a negative thing. This is one of the things I would always notice about 10 or 15 years ago is every year they'd have the student body elections in the spring, and I would make some clever Facebook quote about how you can tell it's spring again because of all the accusations of student election violations. And this year, the student elections were all unopposed. And it's just what does that say about our, maybe it's a student government, maybe it's a loss of faith in government, that we've gone from people so desperate for political office that everybody's either cheating or accusing people of cheating to nobody wanting to get involved. I don't know what that says, but it bothers me slightly.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience?
Do you think COVID negatively affected how much campuses and I guess just the country participates in political activism?
I think it's a definite possibility. I hadn't really thought about it very much until it was discussed earlier, but, I'll be in a group of 40, 50 people or bigger, and I go, oh my gosh, this is kind of nervous. Where's my mask? Things like that. And I imagine that probably happens to more than just me, where people start to get nervous about those things. I also think that anybody who has social anxiety going through 2 years of not having a lot of person-to-person contact has probably increased that anxiety significantly. So I think it's probably other factors, but I could see how that one would be one of them.
Kind of getting off the COVID train, but I'm just curious. I know there's a lot of discussion about free speech in public settings on campus. I'm kind of curious about in classroom, because I know a lot of classes discuss a lot of hard topics that have really differentiating opinions. So kind of what's the rules? How do you manage that?
That is such a good question. Thank you so much for asking it. What I would say is that ultimately the classroom is ruled by the teacher, and the teacher is going to have specific lesson plans or specific points that they were attempting to get across to you. But oftentimes, I'm not going to speak for the entirety of the faculty, but oftentimes they want discussion. They want you to participate. And so that's kind of what the teacher's role is there, to guide the conversation. And it does mean that the teacher has the opportunity and the right that if the conversation starts going super out of where the point or the lesson was supposed to be, to bringing it back to the center. And when we talked about those forums and then the different forums that there are, a classroom is technically a non-public forum, which means that it has probably the most amount of structure or limitations on free speech of any of the other forums. That being said, you're still a student. You still have a right to free speech as long as it's not disrupting things. And what I would say is that if you are having a conversation that's going against the lesson plan, going against what the point of the classroom is, then you're getting in the way of somebody else's right to an education. So when we talk about that, like your right against somebody else's rights, when they conflict, would be that point of conflict. But like I said earlier, I said a lot of stupid stuff when I was in class as an undergrad, and I would not discourage you to also make your opportunities to say stupid stuff during class.
While they think about it, I'll ask maybe one more. Both on the political left and the right, there are some restrictions of speech and access to information that you didn't used to see. So states like Idaho and Utah are restricting people's access to pornography and social media sites. And politicians or former politicians like Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, are saying we should regulate the way Elon Musk and X, formerly Twitter, operates. Does that either personally or professionally, what do you make of these kinds of restrictions on speech and access to information? Do they affect you personally or your role in the university at all?
I think restricting free speech is a slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope that will never help marginalized people ever.
Okay, I agree that it is a slippery slope, but the issue with Elon Musk and formerly Twitter is that he's not blocking the hate speech that was on there before. So how do you think that would impact free speech on a university campus when it's hate speech?
Use that one more time.
Well, the issue with Twitter was that he's no longer blocking hate speech like they were before. So that could be an issue on a college campus if someone is engaging in hate speech on social media and then claiming free speech.
Well, I think I want to be very careful about hate speech. I want to think about protected and unprotected speech. And Shelby will be much better at doing all of this than I am, so I'm going to probably pass a turn in a moment. But hate speech can be protected, right? And you can say wackadoo things all day long, and that is protected. And it sometimes comes into conflict, probably with EP15. I think that's a slippery slope, and I think students or faculty or staff whoever do that find the consequences that they need to find. But yeah, I think overall, like I have this quote because I made some notes, but like many of today's advocates for censorship believe that denying free speech is a way of protecting vulnerable groups, but social progress has come about not as a result of silencing certain speakers, but by ensuring that previously silenced or marginalized groups are empowered to find their voice and have their say.
So what I'm about to say is overly simplified, but I'll say it nonetheless. Hopefully it's something that can trigger in your brain later. You might see something online that you would consider to be hate speech, and it might be protected. But what I would encourage you to look for is it targeted? Are they going after a specific person? Is it a lot, or is it just one time? If you see things like that, your behavior as a student isn't just monitored on campus, it's monitored off campus as well. And it could be a violation of EP15, and it could get you in front of the Dean of Students or the Center of Community Standards. So that's what I would encourage you. If you see something that feels like it is targeted to a specific person, that would be the time when the flag raises in your head.
I'll go with one more. If we have time maybe for one more after that. What would you say to someone who wanted to do the protest out on the mall with graphic images of abortion? Or what would you say to a student who came and said, I don't want to go to class. I understand that I'm not actually restricted from attending class by them demonstrating where they want to demonstrate, but there's no way that I can effectively study when I have to see those images on my way to my classes. What would you say to each person on the side of that dispute?
Yeah, I think to anyone who's like, I'm interested in hosting a protest, I would say start with the police. Start with Assistant Chief Daniels. She will help walk you through everything, any sort of whack or like policy thing, but also the safety, right? And that is at the end of the day, I think her and the police department's number one priority is safety of everyone, but especially those who are organizing. I think 2, take another path. For the most part, when folks are on Terrell Mall, there's a way around them. They can cut through like ground floor of the Cub through the library and go out the other side, or come back on Wilson Short and cut through there over into Todd. I mean, there's 18 ways to get into Todd Hall, I think. So try to take a different path. And when we as a campus know that there is any sort of free speech event happening on the mall, usually the day before, which we often do know, we will post it on social media. So if you're not following WSU Pullman, that is the place to check it out. So that's what I would say.
So thank you so much, Matthew, for covering the part of talking to the students, because that's not really something that I do. But what I would say is that if somebody asked me about what is the free speech implications of utilizing graphic imagery of abortions in a protest, I would say that's protected speech.
Okay, thank you very much. If you're taking an alternative route, maybe stop by and see Mark in Special Collections, and you can see some of the pictures and other historical evidence that he has for that. Those of you who are interested in receiving service hours to have that tracked, take a selfie of yourself here and submit that with your impact on GivePulse. Thanks very much to our moderators and our panelists. It's been a terribly informative discussion, and thank all of you for coming out today.